I carried a lot of trauma from my childhood and
Mm.
adolescence. In many ways, I was very numb, disconnected, or dissociated. And there were times I'd be on the mountain, and portions of the experience can be like a near-death event, where parts of your life are flashing through your mind rapidly. And I would be reliving those events, many of which I had either vague recollection or no memory at all, and it
Right.
would all be flooding back. I would be experiencing those events again with all the vivid sensory impressions, the emotions, the thoughts that were occurring during those times. And
Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast.
Our mission and ongoing goal is to empower our listeners to help them live their best audacious lives ever. It's always a pleasure to be here and share with you each and every episode. I want to take a moment and thank you for taking time out of your day to join us on our journey of self-discovery and empowerment. Now, just like navigating through, a dark room with only a flickering light, making tough decisions within ourselves can be so challenging. And we've all been there. So I know your listeners know exactly what I'm talking about. But by shedding light on our inner struggles and fears, we can illuminate that path towards growth and transformation, much like our guest today, Ben Oofana. That's exactly what he's done with his own life. He's a renowned healer and spiritual mentor who's dedicated his entire life to helping individuals overcome emotional trauma and achieve holistic healing through ancient indigenous practices as well as energy work. With a ton of experience in guiding people towards self-discovery and that inner peace, Ben truly brings a unique perspective to our conversation today. Now, in this episode, I'm really glad that Ben was here because he not only shares just his own personal journey of self-healing and transformation, but he also goes into in-depth and illustrates the power of confronting and processing our past traumas to unlock our potential. His insights on the importance of embracing our emotions and releasing our inner blockages resonate so deeply with the theme of living audaciously. So now that we've got you all set, it's time to turn our conversation over to Ben. Enjoy. Hey, Ben, thank you for joining me here today on the Audacious Living Podcast. I appreciate you taking the time to be here, and thank you again for doing this.
sure, thank you, Audley, for bringing me on today.
Awesome. Now, on this podcast, we encourage individuals to live that best audacious life that we talk about. Um, and the belief truly is that we're all meant to live this path that we're on. Now, from time to time, we run into obstacles and run into challenges that sometimes make it a bit difficult. And really, the onus is on us to push past those things. And certainly, you'd be able to speak a little bit through your own journeys about some of the challenges that you faced and the healing that you had to undergone to get where you are now. So maybe as a starting point, you can fill our listeners in a little bit about your story and what's got you to the point that you're at now.
From a very early age, maybe 3, 4 years old, for some reason, I was just drawn to Native Americans and peoples of other ancient indigenous cultures. And that fascination continued to grow into adolescence. And so by the time I was 17, I'd taken off on my own, and my car got me as far as Oklahoma, and I ended up living among a community of predominantly Kiowa Indians, started attending the peyote meetings, the ceremonies with these native elders. And it was during the peyote meetings that I met my mentor, Horace Delco, who was one of the last surviving traditional doctors among the Kiowa tribe. And because I'm white, I was afraid he would dismiss me, but I after some time, I approached him and I was physically shaking because I just said, I want to learn to do what you're doing. And he says, what are you doing this weekend? Can you start fasting? And he had me drive down to the Wichita Mountains, not eating, drinking the next 2 days and nights. That time, I can't tell anything really significant happened, but he was just wanting to determine if I was truly serious. And later he had me, after the semester ended, come on out to New Mexico, where we lived on the Navajo Indian reservation.
Mm-hmm.
The apprenticeship was very intensive. I mean, he would transmit portions of his own healing gifts to me. But it's not enough to just take that gift and run with the ball. You have to earn the right. And so a big part of our training, the Vision Quest, entails going out to fast alone in the mountains for the 4 days and nights with no food, no water. So, and
Mm.
and then gradually had me start helping him,
Right.
assisting him, working with his patients. So
Mm-hmm.
that's
Wow.
how it all began.
And what did you learn about yourself as you're, I mean, especially during a fasting, there's opportunities for learning. What did you learn about yourself?
So many things. I carried a lot of trauma from my childhood and adolescence. In many ways, I was very numb, disconnected, or dissociated. And there were times I'd be on the mountain and portions of the experience can be like a near-death event, where parts of your life are flashing through your mind rapidly. And I would be reliving those events, many of which I had either vague recollection or no memory at all. And it
Right.
would all be flooding back. I would be experiencing those events again with all the vivid sensory impressions, the emotions, the thoughts that were occurring during those times. And very intensely. They were incredibly vivid, but I could feel this extraordinarily powerful presence working within my body.
Right.
And it's like all that trauma, those sensory impressions, everything was being transformed in a way. And I could feel myself like digesting those lived events and all the highly charged emotions attached to
Right.
them.
Right.
Yeah.
And that could be so ground shaking in many ways when you sort of come to this realization of these things in your past that are
Mhm.
following you probably didn't even know about, right?
Right. Yeah. And a nice thing too about it as well is that, for many of us, we carry this whatever emotional wounding, maybe come from a really dysfunctional family background. Some of us experienced whatever trauma, whether emotional, physical, or sexual trauma. And in many respects, that could be very debilitating, incapacitating, and we're on a continuum with that. It affects us profoundly, but it varies tremendously from one individual to the next. And what I found is that I'd go through this experience and it would be dismantling. It's like we develop these inner configurations or models. It's like a framework in a
Yes.
sense that determines, it's like the resources or the capacities or lack thereof, the internal models and everything that enable us to get through life.
Right.
I don't know if it's the best analogy, but you see, like when the um, PCs first came out and we had access to computers, was it 386, 486? They had very
Right.
limited capacity. And now you have computers that are, they have much higher capacity. We could edit film or video, and
Sure.
there's all kinds of applications that were
Yep.
just not possible before. And so when I work with people individually, I'm scanning their body and mind. I'll have them stand in front of me and I hold my hand in front of the body and I can see and feel what's going on with them, what kind of
Right.
emotions they're struggling with,
Mm-hmm.
the issues, and where they have what resources they possess, where there are certain deficits, where they lack certain functional
Right.
capacities. And there's a vast difference from one individual to the next. And
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
and so my experience there is I would go through this vision quest, as I've continued to do so, which I have dozens of times.
Mm-hmm.
It would just keep dismantling those old limiting constructs, and it would build this new foundation that I didn't have before. And so in the course of working with people, like the native indigenous healers, the traditional doctors, we all work as conduits, in the sense
Okay.
we have this extraordinarily powerful presence working through us.
Yes.
So it goes much further than what most people know of in this culture, what energy work or something. I mean, there are
Yes.
other forces or beings working through us that will go in to do regenerative work in the body, physiologically. If someone experiences injured from an automobile accident, if they
Yep.
suffering from colitis or Crohn's disease or heart disease or whatever, it's going in to do reconstructive work, and it's going in, again, if they've experienced whatever emotional wounding or trauma, it's taking
Right.
those lived experiences and emotions and enabling them to thoroughly digest it. So,
So
yeah,
what, and I think what's so important about the healing work is uh, 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 by addressing, the stuff in our past or in our childhood, let's say, where I think for many it does stem from childhood, right? But
a
I think
lot.
by addressing that stuff, it enables you to get rid of those blockers that are in front of you, so your life is able to progress. I think so oftentimes people say, oh, you know what? I mean, put in that closet, slam the door shut, and pretend like it's not there, right?
Mhm.
But that's not addressing the problem. And it's not, and they live their lives thinking they're fine. But in actuality, they're not. And they still need to have some form of healing.
Yeah, and there's both the fact that most people, the vast majority of people, have not learned to work constructively with their emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And so these various events that they've lived through over the course of their life that have caused them distress or that were wounding or traumatic,
Yep.
and we tend to disconnect. We do everything we can to push the emotions down or the memories, or
Yep.
and so I will see a lot of people. There are many people that go through their lives, and maybe in many respects they are highly functional. They
Right.
do have a lot of resources, and yet this emotional wounding, it can affect them in all kinds of ways. Maybe in some respects it can some kind of self-sabotage, or maybe they're succeeding in their professional lives, but when it comes to their intimate personal relationships, they tend to attract partners that abuse and abandon them, that
Right.
reenact a lot of the deeply wounding experiences that go back to childhood. Some of these experiences could be more recent, physical or sexual assault, or, times I've worked with people after returning from, who had served in Iraq or Afghanistan, or maybe further back, Vietnam, and they're still carrying that wounding. And even just on a day-to-day basis, there are a lot of us that are just struggling.
Yes.
People have financial struggles and the overwhelming anxiety, like, how am I going to pay the bills? How am I going to
Right.
make it?
Right.
And are having a job that, you're uh, just day after day going into a job that you don't want to be there, or maybe
Right.
you hate the job, or your coworkers, or the people you're
Yep.
working for. Yeah,
Yep.
all
Yep.
these things. We
And
internalize
I
that.
think, as I say, one thing I think is really important is to recognize that these things are happening to you, because
Right.
there's another piece of this too, on a subconscious level, that
Mhm.
there's things happening that are negative, or creating sort of uneasiness
Right.
that we're just not aware of. So I think
Right.
one of the I often equate awareness to, like, I've used this analogy before, where, like, so you have I picture like a living room, and in the
Mhm.
living room you got your couch and your coffee table and your television, right?
Mhm.
But if you turn off that light, right, the things are still there, they're just in the dark. Well, that
Right.
light switch turns them on and you can see them, right? The
Right.
light switch didn't put the things there, they always were there. And so
Right.
I equate awareness to that light switch that enables us to see the things that are in the room already.
Right. Yeah, that's a big part of the reason, like on a daily basis, I generally do about 2 hours of meditation practice.
Mm,
And some people are like, oh, I don't have time for that. Well, it's how much time do you spend scrolling through social media?
right, right, right.
How much time do you spend watching television? So it's what you choose to do with your time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also the reason I've chosen to go back to the mountains so many times, the Vision Quest, because, training both with a Native American doctor, medicine man, and a master from China,
Right.
also spending time in India, Sri Lanka, people in the Hindu Vedic tradition, and these individuals spend their lifetimes doing hours of intensive daily
Wow.
practice. They're continually developing greater awareness, greater capacities, resources, often far beyond the range that many people even consider to be humanly possible.
Mm, mm. Yeah, no, I think it's a very important practice for people, and meditation can take different forms. I think some
Uh-huh.
people think when they think meditation, it's got to be, maybe you're in a certain type of a room, sitting a certain type of way, wearing a certain type of outfit or something, and meditation can be even just that moment of silence. It could be a form of meditation.
Yeah, and there's walking meditation. It's some people have trouble sitting, and so
Yep.
I'll take them out, drop them deep into their emotions and bodily sensations as they're walking at a gradual pace, and they can, I mean, even when I would do it, I would drop so deep into state, and it's almost like an altered state. And there are times I'd run into people who knew me, and several instances where I'd run into like a couple, different couples on different occasions, and
Right.
one would look at me and say, "Your eyes are glowing," and they'd look at the other. It's like, Am I really seeing this?" Because I would get into such a profoundly deep state. But I
Yes.
teach people this practice as well.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Um, is it something difficult to start, like get into? Like for
Now,
someone who doesn't know nothing and they go, I want to start meditating. What do they do? What do they do?
I think there's so many different forms of meditation practice, and I think it's good to explore. And yet, one of the most basic forms of meditation, it's a system of practice that I developed on my own.
Hmm.
It's similar in some ways to Buddhist mindfulness practice, but it goes a lot farther in some respects, is sit down comfortably, close your eyes, and as you do so, bring to your awareness, like, what's going on in your life? What is
Gotcha.
it that concerns you?
Mm,
If there are things pertaining to your work or professional life, to your um, dynamics playing out within your relationship with your intimate partner or with other family members, bring that to the forefront of your awareness. So acknowledge what's happening, step one. Two, what do you feel in response to it? Like, what are you feeling emotionally?
right.
What are your bodily sensations that arise in response to these events or concerns or issues? Bring all that to your awareness,
Mm,
acknowledge what you're feeling, and then where do these feelings or sensations land
yes.
within your body?
Yes.
Are
That's an
they in your
important one.
chest cavity? Are they
Yep.
down in your abdomen? Are they towards your back, or wherever you find them? Bring as much awareness as you can, descend into these parts of your body.
Yes.
Feel as though you're getting into the middle of the feelings and bodily sensations. Allow them to be what they are. You're not trying to breathe them out. You're not sprinkling fairy dust on them. You're not sending any white light or anything like that. You just let them be what they are.
Yes.
And as you fully immerse in those feelings and sensations, you breathe softly and deeply, and you follow the feelings and sensations. As you do so, they will go through a progression, they will change. If something has occurred that's excruciatingly painful, like if you're maybe you just the shock of you realize that the person you've been seeing has ghosted you or
Right.
just broke up with you or the death of a loved one. Sometimes some of these feelings can be slow moving. They may not change very rapidly or readily.
Mm.
But what I found is if you just stay with the feelings and sensations, even if it takes 30 minutes or an hour
Yep.
or multiple hours, they will go through a progression. Sometimes they will initially intensify, they will move to
Yes.
different locations in your
Yep.
body, or they'll change. You'll start with one feeling like maybe anger or resentment, maybe underneath it, there's sadness or regret or fear. It can go through this progression.
Yep.
Um, when I started, I had no guidance. And because the traumas of my childhood and adolescence, I was enacting them through my attempts at intimate relationships.
Right.
The pain was so excruciating, but I would descend into the depths and I would keep breathing, sometimes for hours. But at a certain point, I could feel it break open and the pain would come out of my body in waves. And then there would be these powerful emanations of warmth glowing from within. Now, as I kept doing the practice over time, what happens is the pain decreases. So we carry less pain in our body, less sadness, less grief, less hurt. And when we don't have so much of our bandwidth taken up by these distressing emotions, hurt, anger, rage, sadness, grief, whatever, fear, then it makes available to us so many more resources. We have all
Yep.
this additional bandwidth. So we have more functional capacity to get in. We become more highly functional. We can do more of what we need to do.
Gotcha.
Much more resources available.
Yeah, no, and I think an awareness to that is so important for many of us. I mean, on this podcast, we talk about living our best audacious life, but we
Right.
can't until we understand our own bandwidth and understand our limits and understand our potentials. And we're not able to get to those places. And so, I really
Exactly.
appreciate you sort of laying that out, and appreciate you for being here on the podcast and giving our listeners an understanding of just the power of looking within first. That's what I'm hearing from you loud and clear. There's so
Yeah.
much power with looking within as a starting point. For our listeners that want to learn more about you, Ben, or catch up with your work, where can we send them?
Best place is go to my website. It's just benoofana.com. And I assume you'll post that below the video or the
Yeah.
podcast link. Yeah. Again, benoofana.com. If you do happen to be going through the midst of a breakup or
Yeah.
something, a divorce, ghosted, there's a link. There's a free ebook, just getting over your breakup.com.
Mhm.
And you can download that free ebook. So
Yeah.
also, I was going to say, it depends on the issue or the stress or what's
Sure.
happening. There
Sure.
are things that occur in our lives that are not that big of a deal. Maybe it upsets us in the
Yep.
moment or stresses us out. And there are times where we could sit down, immerse ourselves in the feelings and bodily sensations and breathe, and we can cycle through it in
Mm.
10 minutes, maybe 5 or
Yep.
less. So, but
That's
the
a great point.
importance is giving ourselves the time that it needs.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you. That time is important. It can do so much wonders for us, and I'm glad that you're able to share that with us here. We'll make sure that our listeners will be able to connect with you. We'll make sure all the details are in our show notes. Ben, thank you for doing this today. This is awesome, man. I appreciate the insights, and I appreciate the time as well.
Sure. Could I add one more thing that's important
Totally.
to build onto this? Okay. The other thing too is that what I'm describing, the practice I'm describing, is that we all possess, there's an innate healing intelligence that resides within our body, so that we get a cut or bruise,
Yep.
and the body's healing intelligence will work to mend that injury.
Yes.
We need to be realistic as well, that there are limitations to our body and mind's innate healing intelligence. And so that's where we also need to incorporate the most effective therapeutic interventions. It's going to vary some according to the individual. Like some individuals, I would recommend doing psychotherapy. I can't say that generally. I'd have to speak with you individually. But other individuals I've found other interventions I've found that are especially effective, for instance, whether doing that sensory deprivation flotation tanks, therapeutic massage. If you have deep tissue body work, for instance, a lot of the emotions that are trapped in our bodies, it's when we do the deep tissue massage, it breaks these emotions loose. It brings them up to the surface so that we can access them. So that will help us to process them. Once we can access them, it also helps we'll sleep better. We'll have less stress and tension in our body. The two most powerful interventions that of anything that I found is, for instance, like I said, going through the vision quest where I go out that 4 days and nights, no food and water, alone in the mountains. Also, if you have the opportunity to work with a gifted healer such as myself, someone who's a conduit, allowing this presence to work through us as individuals, and that facilitates the healing of whether physical injuries or, again, maybe digestive, respiratory disorders, someone's experiencing asthma. So a wide range of physiological health conditions, but also the emotional wounding, because sometimes we need that intervention to take these traumatic or other distressing, painful lived experiences to transform that, to facilitate that process of digestion, to facilitate the healing that we cannot fully do on our own. So I just wanted to add that in. It's critically important.
Well, I think it's a good point. Like, I think we have to also be, it's just another thing to be mindful of. And I think it's important when we talk about healing. So, because if you're not mindful of everything, I don't think you're doing the healing justice journey if you're not, right? So
True.
I'm hearing you loud and clear. Ben, this is awesome, man. Thank you. Be well.
Thank you.
Back, we're here on the podcast. Now, the main takeaway from our conversation with Ben is the transformative power of introspection and healing. By acknowledging and processing our emotional wounds, we create space for growth, resilience, and self-empowerment. For those looking to delve deeper into the journey of healing or explore Ben's services, you can easily connect with him through the contact details, which of course we provided in the show notes below. And I'd encourage individuals to catch up with Ben directly. He's been gracious enough to offer a special offer to our listeners because he has a free ebook on overcoming breakups and emotional healing. And again, we have the details on how to get that valuable resource in the show notes. Thank you so much for tuning in to another edition of the Audacious Living Podcast. As always, if you found value in today's episode and it was inspiring and insightful in some way, please, I certainly encourage you to like, follow, subscribe, and share, because that's how we grow this podcast and how we reach even more people and can encourage them to grow as well. Remember, our journey to living audaciously starts from within. So stay bold and stay empowered and keep on shining bright. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.